Good morning. We have some interesting like Zoom things happening here. Like the clock is way too zoomed in. This is a little bit off. Like everything feels like off to me. I hate it, right? I'm like, this won't go down. That's too zoomed in. This is too zoomed out. I can't fix any of it. I'm like, talk about lack of control. It's driving me nuts already. It's been like 7 minutes of me being in here and I'm already over it. But I don't know why it looks like this, but at least it's working, I suppose.
Yeah, remember if her work on the DSM on you.
Right. I do enjoy control. That's definitely not, that's definitely true. And I am particular, it's funny, my partner is we'll talk about OCPD later in the semester, where everything has to be like just so. And after 21 years of being together, I'm very much that way now too. So it drives me nuts that it's like not perfect, but I can't do anything about it, so I'm gonna let it go, right? As best as I can. Is everyone doing okay? Hanging in there? October 21st already. Halloween is next week,
Next Thursday.
right? I wish that we were meeting on Halloween, but we're not. So we're gonna meet the day before, but that's close enough. I'm gonna wear my dinosaur inflatable costume to my soccer practice on Wednesday next week. All my little girls were like, I want to see you try and practice like an inflatable dinosaur. I'm like, let's do it. I'll try. That'll work for like 5 minutes.
Now, the class after you have to show the photos. So.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, maybe I'll have my youngest take some pictures because that'll be funny. Oh. All right, we have our second exam on Wednesday. I'll talk about that at the end, but I put it up there. So we don't have class on Wednesday because we have our second test. We'll finish up chapter 10 today. It might not even take us the entire time, but we'll get through chapter 10. Then we have a little case study to do to kind of close that up. I did grade all of your papers as well. I hope you saw that. If you didn't turn it in, you still can. You can still email that second part of the paper to me. It is 10% off each day, even half credit, even 20 points is better than no points. So if you didn't turn it in and you regret it, email it to me whenever you want to at this point. You can still get half points for it. But most of you did a great job. A lot of fun characters, a lot of older characters, like older movies and older shows, which I think is kind of fun. But I graded them all. The biggest reason people lost points was not giving me an academic source. So you got partial points for the source because it was like a .com or a .org. But a lot of you got the full 40 points, some good progress. There were one or two of you who really like wrote quite a bit and have a lot of progress toward your final paper. But not giving me enough or not giving me the proper source was the biggest reason people lost points, if at all. So we have one more part of that paper, like the full paper, is due, if you look, the 18th of November. So about a month from now. So you have lots of time and we'll work up to that, of course. But one more part, and that's like the full paper where you expand everything out. As a side note, if at any point between now and when the final paper is due, if you want to give me a rough draft to look over, I'm always willing to look it over for you. Okay, so if you finish it early and you want some feedback before you turn it in, you can email it to me and I'd be happy to look it over. You have about a month. And again, we'll kind of talk about that along the way and work up to it. I think that was everything I wanted to say about that. Are there any questions about the second part of the paper or anything so far before we jump back into our weirdly projected topic on drugs? Yeah. Yeah. So the source is something like we talked about that's going to help you to write the paper, right? So when you're talking about which disorder your character has, you got to get that information from somewhere. So a lot of people, I would say like 80–90% of people use the DSM as their academic source so that they had somewhere where all the criteria are listed, right? Or maybe you use a book that helps you with causes and treatments. So when you write that final paper, you need a source to help you with writing it. Especially the diagnosis piece, or maybe it's the causes or treatments, and that's where that source is going to come in handy. So you only need one, and I recommended everyone could use the DSM. It's kind of an easy one to use, but it could be a book or a journal article or anything like that as well. Anything else for now? Anybody else? Yeah. So we started this last time, right? We were talking about that there's lots of different categories of drugs, depressants that slow you down, stimulants that speed you up, hallucinogens that distort your perception and cause like sensory, images or experiences when there's nothing there. And then we left off here. So let me make this slightly bigger. I'll try and let that go. But if we look at, I just want to pull it down. If it was lower, it wouldn't bother me, but I can't do anything. So there are really two main disorders when it comes to this chapter. There's really only two. And to be honest, there's only one really main one, but there is another kind of smaller one that we'll talk about. But it used to be that people who had issues with drug use could have one of two disorders. They could have abuse or dependence. Now, the kind of silly thing was that most people had both, right? If you were abusing a drug, you were dependent on it. And so in the new DSM, the DSM-5, they combine them together into one diagnosis. And it makes much more sense. So when people have a substance use disorder, they're abusing and dependent on and have a hard time with a substance or substances. Now, intoxication, let's say you have a lot to drink, like a lot of alcohol, or you're using a drug. Intoxication is like a short-term result of using a substance. As it says up here, it's temporary, maybe undesirable behavioral or psychological changes that come after using a substance. It's a short-term thing. So substance use disorder is very different than like a short-term, I used a drug once and I feel like drunk or high or intoxicated in some way. When people have substance use disorder, it's a long-term problematic pattern with a substance or substances. And I have a little video that kind of introduces some of the criteria for it, and then we'll talk about it and I'll put them up on the board. There are quite a few different like symptoms that you could have. So let me play this for you and then we'll come back and go over that. Pause this here. And different from a one-time, maybe couple of time periodic use, this is a long-term pattern. And as he mentioned in there, you specify the drug with this, right? So what you would say if someone has a substance use disorder with cocaine, or substance use disorder with alcohol, or substance use disorder with whatever drugs they're using. So you specify the specific drugs, but in order to have this diagnosis, it's two or more of a bunch of symptoms that we'll talk about over at least a year. Okay, so again, a long-term pattern. This is going on for a long period of time. Oftentimes people have like smaller like periods of time where they're struggling, but they can turn it around. If it lasts at least a year, then we can qualify for this. So let's look at some of the symptoms. There's a bunch of them. As I said, there's two or more. So one of the things that people have is they take more and more over time. So increased amount of the substance over time. So as he mentioned, maybe you start with 1 cup of coffee and then it goes to 2 and then it goes to 3, or 1 drink and then 2 and then 3. Just over time, it progressively kind of escalates to more and more and more. You have a lot of unsuccessful attempts to cut down or stop. To say reduce or stop your use. So maybe you know it's a problem and you keep trying to stop, or you keep trying to have less, but it's unsuccessful. You kind of end up going back to it, end up taking more of it, right? So there's these frequent or unsuccessful attempts to reduce it, even though you struggle to do so. There's a lot of time spent around the drug. So maybe that is using it, thinking about it, acquiring it, but you spend a lot of time and energy around the substance. Again, it could be thinking about it or getting it or using it, any of those things. You have a hard time fulfilling your obligations. So failure to fulfill obligations because of the use of the drug, right? So you're so hungover that you miss class in the morning, right? You are so hungover that you can't get to work, right? And so you start to like have problems at your job. right? So it's affecting your ability to fulfill the obligations in your life because you're using that substance so much. You continue to use it despite all these problems. So we could say continued use despite problems. Despite the fact that it's caused you a relationship, like a loss of a relationship, or it's affecting your grade in a class, you continue to use the substance because you are addicted to it or dependent on it. Let's see, you stop doing activities you enjoy because of the drug. So stop activities you enjoy. Right, so you no longer do something because you're so busy using the substance or it's affecting your ability to do so. It puts you in situations that are physically hazardous or dangerous. So driving drunk, right? Or like doing things when you're high, right? That could put you in a very dangerous or physically hazardous kind of situation. See what else? There's a couple more. You have strong craving for the substance. You think about it all the time. You're craving it. You want it, right? You can't get it off of your mind. And then you have tolerance and withdrawal. So a lot of different like symptoms here. You only have to have two, but oftentimes people have a lot of these. Tolerance is when you need more and more of the drug to get the same effect. And we were talking about this a little bit last time, right? With coffee, that maybe one cup of coffee wakes you up, right? And then you need another cup of coffee eventually to wake up, right? And if you don't have those cups of coffee, you feel awful, which is the withdrawal piece. I worked at Starbucks when I was in graduate school, and I often felt like a drug pusher, right? Like people would come in like all like they like looked horrible, like they're like in a bad place, and they're like, I just need my coffee, I need my coffee, I need my coffee. And you would give it to them and they would just hold it, and like you could just see the relief on their face of like, I'm gonna be okay in a minute, right? And then I would watch people go from like a tall to a grande to a venti to a triple venti to a quad venti, right? We didn't have the Trenta when I worked there, right? But people would just keep going up and up and up, needing more and more and more to get the same effect. You become tolerant to it. And when I first started working at Starbucks, I had literally never had coffee before. Like I didn't grow up in a family that drank coffee. And so I remember interviewing and they were like, what do you like about coffee? And in my mind, all I could think was like nothing. It tastes like dirt, right? Like some taste like better dirt than others, but dirt, right? It tastes horrible. I didn't know about caramel yet. I don't want to put enough caramel in their coffee tastes good. But I remember giving them a line of like, it's the great social facilitator. Like people get together over coffee, they meet over coffee, they fall in love over coffee. I got hired. That was a good line, I suppose. But I remember the first time, like that first week, they had me try like little sample cups of coffee. And I was like buzzed out of my mind from these tiny little cups of coffee. And then eventually that did nothing. And I could drink like a whole like cup without an issue. And then a bigger cup and then a bigger cup. That's tolerance, right? It stops having the same effect and you need more and more of it to get that like result. And if you don't have this, you feel awful because it affects you on a chemical level. Those like the chemistry of your body depends on that substance after a certain point. And if you don't give it to your system, then you get headaches and stomach aches. I have friends that like if they don't drink their cup of coffee, like I don't want to be around them. Like they're miserable, right? They're cranky and they're tired and they have no energy, right? People oftentimes really struggle with the withdrawal symptoms of not having a substance that you are used to. And some drugs like alcohol can even kill you from withdrawal if you do it instantly, right? So someone who drinks a ton, if they quit cold turkey, can actually be fatal because their body is so dependent on that substance. So a lot of different symptoms, but you have to have two of them or more over a year in order to meet this diagnosis. The other one that's up here, a little bit different, substance-induced disorders. So do you remember when we talked about criteria for disorders, there was one for every single disorder, right? Cannot be due to the use of a drug or a general medical condition. So if a substance is caused by the use of a drug, we call it a substance-induced disorder. So let's say someone has anxiety because they're abusing stimulants. they would have a substance-induced disorder. That anxiety was caused or induced by the use of a drug. So if symptoms come from a drug, then we call it this. If the drug itself is the problem, then it's substance use disorder, if that makes sense. Any like thoughts or questions, stories, comments, anything about this disorder? Again, this is like the one disorder in this category, or two, I guess, but one or two. Any thoughts, questions? I have a little case study, but let me get a couple more slides and then we'll go over it. So I'll leave this up. But again, the idea here is that you are having a problematic relationship with a substance or substances. It can be more than one. Really dangerous to combine substances. There's something called synergy. Synergy is when people, typically we talk about it in a good way, when people work together and they accomplish more together than they could alone. Okay, that's when we have synergy. But when a drug has synergy, what we mean by that is that it is stronger because of a combination of factors than it would be on its own. And people love to combine substances to get a more dramatic effect, right? Very common, easy example. People love to combine things like Red Bull and vodka, or like Monster and Jaeger, right? Like whatever it might be, you're combining a stimulant with a depressant, and it can be incredibly dangerous. When people are taking multiple prescription drugs, it can be dangerous because they interact with each other in unpredictable ways. When people drink alcohol and take something like Valium or Xanax, it can be incredibly dangerous, oftentimes fatal, because they augment each other. So when people combine substances, they have this unpredictable effect, and it has claimed a lot of lives, right? And there's just a few, like just a couple examples of like really famous people. And I could add like Matthew Perry up here, one of the newer like examples with ketamine, right? But there's a lot of examples of people who have died as a result of either prescription medications or like combining drugs together. Because when you do that, they have a very unpredictable effect. It can be very, very dangerous, oftentimes deadly for people. And some of these are prescription medications, and some on purpose and some not. But a lot of people meeting tragic ends because of combining substances. All right. Before I get to causes, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you, as I said, I have a little case study about a young woman struggling with ecstasy, right? And this is a true story. I love that they have like a picture of her, right? I left it so you could visualize her as we go, right? But what I want you to do is I want you to read through this, and then I just want you to do number one. Okay, number one is about like what symptoms does she have? So just do number one. You can bullet them, you can list them, you can highlight it in here. There's definitely quite a few examples. So I'll let you read this, and then just like last time, I would suggest maybe working on it with a couple of people around you. But read through it and just do number one for now. All right, so again, read through the case studies like a page and a little bit at the back, and then answer number one. Again, I would recommend doing it in groups, but it's up to you. All right, so when you're done reading it again, make a bulleted list for number one. What are some symptoms she has? You can work on that with other people if you want, or you can do it on your own. I'll give you a few more minutes and then we can talk about it again, just the number one for now. Folks, anyone need a little bit more time? Another minute or okay, we'll take like another minute to talk about it. Yeah. Yeah, have you ever heard someone say you have like an addictive personality? Yeah. Mhm.
Whatever, just in that sense, in very sense at least.
Sure. It's hard because substances are inherently addictive, right? Like you drink coffee and you feel awake and you feel good. It would be hard not to want to do it again, right? Or you drink alcohol and it makes you feel more relaxed and like it's easier to be around other people. I think substances inherently on their own are kind of addicting because of conditioning. The whole idea of like an addictive personality is just the idea that you're more like maybe born with a propensity toward addiction. Addiction can run in families for sure, but it could also be something you're taught or is modeled to you. So it can go either way. That like there isn't necessarily like an addictive personality diagnosis of anything like that, but some people are definitely more susceptible to addiction than others, and it could depend on the substance. It depends on the person. Substance use is complicated because of that, right? It can get really. Yeah.
Say that it's interesting how you say two or more symptoms, because right now this case is like extreme thing.
Yeah.
But some people usually like just do it, they're not ordering, they,
Yeah.
they think that's the problem.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's happened, maybe I'm wrong, so in Colombia, we just not illegal, but I feel it's for everybody, like.
Fairly
hang
common.
out and I'm like, can I do, like, they have to be. So, you're hanging out with friends, so I don't know if that's considered like a problem or.
It could be.
How do you?
Yeah, where's the line, right? Because a lot of people use substances, like I shared with you, I have a cup of coffee every day, right? Like literally every day. And so, and I have for years, so technically, I would meet some of these criteria, but it's not causing significant distress or impairment. It's not interfering with my life in any way. I haven't lost like friendships when I don't drink coffee or like not done my job, you know, it's like, what you have to look at is it causing problems? Right, and that's not always clear either, because maybe it doesn't cause problems for that person, but it causes problems for the other people around them, right, which can then make it tricky, or the problems aren't obvious, like money could be the problem that you're having from it, or just that dependency of like, if you don't have it, you can't hang out with other people. That's what makes it so tricky, is it's not always obvious, oh, I only do it on the weekend. Okay, but you've been doing it on the weekend for over a year, it's causing issues, you still could meet the criteria. Or you could be using a substance constantly and not have it be a problem, right? Some people have that too.
Fact that sometimes I'm not stopping, it's considered a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so technically, I feel like I could stop caffeine if I wanted to. That felt like a justification, right? If I wanted to, I could, but I don't feel like it's a problem for me, which could easily be a rationalization and denial, which a lot of people do when they have substance disorders, because technically, right? I mean, I haven't met that one. I haven't done that one, but you spend a lot of time getting coffee every week, so that's one, right? And, let's see. I crave it for sure. I would have a headache if I didn't do it. So technically that's 3, but it's not interfering with my life in any way or causing problems, and it's a milder substance. Now, it could be a problem for some people. As I mentioned, I have friends who I think they've lost friendships because of coffee. Because when they don't have it, they're cranky to be around. They're spending money they don't have, which is causing problems. So it's like a severity thing, which makes it a little ambiguous sometimes. It's not like as black and white as I think it can be. This is, like you said, kind of an extreme example, right? It's obvious that she has an issue, but for a lot of people, I think you go either way. It's tricky. Well, let's talk about her a little bit more. What are some symptoms that she has? She's got a bunch of them. As we said, it's kind of an extreme example. Somebody give me one that you wrote down. What's one symptom that's a problem? Yeah. Yeah, right? More and more of the substance trying to get that same feeling. Yeah.
She turned into a person who didn't care about.
Yeah, right. She didn't care at all. She lost a lot of things as a result of her drug use. What are some other ones? Yeah.
Continue to spider problems, or I said that she had less being, those balance and
Yeah.
then she can overbuild that.
Yeah, right. All good examples. Yeah.
I'll say, she. There's 2 things I'm trying to think about.
Sure.
So, she didn't enjoy acting as much as she used to.
Yeah.
So I know it's kind of a bit on the board,
Yeah. But it's kind of you're using it despite the problems. You're stopping activities you enjoy. Would be that one, right? That's a good example of that. Yeah.
She was surrounding herself with people who do drugs, so
Yeah.
obviously it's gonna be something easy access.
Yeah, right. And so you could say maybe a lot of time spent around the drug and people who are using it as well. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's affecting her health, right? I slipped in that 13-month, time frame, so it's over a year. Anything else that we want to say? I think those are all the big ones, but anything else that you have that wasn't written down yet? Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Which would be nice to have. But yeah, in this case, right, around the use of that substance, she has a lot of withdrawals when she doesn't use it, right? She's shaking and headaches. That's another common symptom, right? So you can see the symptoms that she has here. We'll get to number 2 and 3 in a minute. Let's talk about causes and treatments, and then I'll have you look at those too. So hold off on that for just a minute. But just like with eating disorders, it's kind of a multifaceted approach, right? I think you could really argue any disorder is that way, but it's definitely true when it comes to substance and eating disorders and so on. A lot of like correlations with sociocultural stuff. People who grow up in like poverty or low socioeconomic conditions. There are like correlations with ethnicity and race because of some of those sociocultural like events that tend to happen. So stressful like SES or socioeconomic conditions can correlate with people having substance abuse. It's almost an escape, if you will, or growing up in a place where maybe there's more access to those substances because of that. Freud said that it was a form of dependency. So Freud or psychodynamic stuff, Freud said that like maybe you had unmet needs when you were a child. And so you try and meet those needs through altering yourself through a substance. Okay, so maybe you felt like a hole inside yourself because you weren't, you didn't have the needs met by your parents when you were little. So you use substances to try and fill that hole or try and like ignore that hole that you feel. He correlated it to dependency. Right? Things that happened when you were very young. Of course, everything with Freud is like something with your mom and dad when you were very little. That just kind of sums up his theories very, very simplistically. From a behavioral and cognitive standpoint, we look a lot at conditioning. And I think you can see some examples of that in the case study, which we'll get to. But as I mentioned, drugs are very rewarding, right? When you feel a rush from the use of a drug, or you feel better, or you feel awake, right? Those are very like strong positive reinforcers. And so people can develop like an addiction because of that reinforcement. It's very conditioning based. Or the thoughts that you have, right? Like the expectations and thoughts that you build around a substance. There are definitely biological things, genetically, right? We tend to see that addiction tends to run in families. Maybe people don't get that natural rush or like reward feeling that most of us get. And so you have to seek it through like dangerous activities or the use of a substance, something with like the reward center in the brain. You're not getting those dopamine rushes that most of us get when we do something thrilling or exciting or scary. And so you're doing things to cause that for yourself to counter that like reward deficiency that you're having. And so it could be something biological or genetic, could be very behavioral and conditioning based, have to do with your thoughts and expectations and what you like decide in your mind. Could be sociocultural. Freud's idea is a little bit of support, but not a ton. It's probably some combination of all of these, which is typically what we see. But it's a lot of different factors that can build together to make somebody more vulnerable to having a substance use disorder. And when we treat it, it kind of depends on which one we're focusing on, right? So Freud would say we have to go back and figure out what needs weren't met and why you're trying to meet them now and like work through that through therapy. All right, so Freud would say, let's go back and figure out what you didn't get as a child, work through that, and that will help you with your dependency needs now. More common than that are like behavioral or cognitive behavioral therapies. So what we might do, let's say someone is really addicted to cigarettes, right? Or really addicted to alcohol. Let's look at how can we maybe make that unpleasant. There are substances that you can take that make you throw up if you drink alcohol. Now, the easy solution is if you want to drink, you don't take the substance, right? You don't take the medication. And a lot of people will do that. But what happens is when you take this drug, it makes you throw up the second that you drink alcohol. And the idea is to make it unpleasant instead of pleasant. Or we can do things like journaling, which is really common. When are you using the substance? Are there times of day that are triggers for you? Are there people that are triggers for you? Are there events that tend to trigger you? Let's identify all of those so that we can try and change them. Maybe it's a certain time of day that's hard for you, or a certain environment that's hard for you, or certain people make it hard for you, right? And so as a result of journaling, we might be able to identify that and then try and turn it around. And that's definitely something I think we can see with this young woman in the case study, that maybe her environment or the people around her is contributing. Again, we'll get to that in a moment. But a lot of like behavioral or cognitive behavioral approaches of looking at the thoughts, looking at the conditioning, how can we break those cycles? How can we turn them around as a way to try and stop the substance use issue? We also typically have to detox people, right? If somebody's heavily addicted to a drug, we have to get them off of it, right? And that's a very common thing to do, is to have them detox. And this might need to be done in a facility, depending on the drug and how long they've been using it. It might need to be something that's kind of gradual. There are even times where we use other drugs to get somebody off of a drug. It's kind of a silly idea. Let me use this drug to get you off of this other drug. But it sometimes is kind of a little bit of a gateway that can make it less harsh. For example, when people are really addicted to heroin, sometimes we use a drug called methadone to help them get off of the heroin. The methadone is prescribed by a doctor. It's less intense and severe. And so it's kind of like a segue off of it. Or when people are trying to quit smoking and they use like a nicotine gum, right? That would be another, another example of using a substance to get off of a substance. Right? Something that's not as intense or dangerous. But people can become dependent on the other substance, right? You can become dependent on methadone. You can become dependent on a nicotine gum or a patch, right? And so the idea is we have to get the substance out of your system in order to allow you to get better, in order to address the underlying causes that might be contributing to the disorder. So detoxing is a big thing, again, in a facility or maybe at home or like over time, it depends on the substance, but getting you off of it. We also sometimes use things like AA, very common, or NA, right? Any of the NA, AA, like there's a ton of these different like self-help groups where people go and they get peer support. You oftentimes have a sponsor, somebody who's been, working on this for longer, kind of a 12-step program of slowly getting yourself off of a substance, getting rewarded. But so you get little like tokens, literally tokens along the way to reward you for your steps that you're making. Or as I mentioned, sometimes getting like hospitalized or put into a facility for a short period of time where you can be medically supervised as you get off of the drug. Trying to work on prevention is big, right? My kids always have their like red ribbon week. It's hard to say, red ribbon week. At some point during their school year where they're learning about drugs and they're learning about the harmful effects of them. We do a lot of like preventative efforts. It used to be like scare tactics. Like I grew up in the generation of like, if you use drugs, you'll die. Like it'll ruin your life and you'll die. And then you use a drug once and you're like, oh, I'm okay. And everything they taught you just kind of goes out the window. And so I think now we try and focus a little more on like, how can we educate you on the dangers of drugs, but not necessarily have as intensive scare tactics because they don't always hold up when people use a substance. So it's kind of a multi-pronged effort at treatment, just like it's a dimensional approach to what causes them. And let's like apply that here to our case study. So take a few more minutes, look at some of the causes, and then what are some of the options for treatment. So again, write down some of the thoughts you have there's a lot of things that I think contribute for her. So get some of those down. And then what are some of the options for treatment? And as I mentioned before, if you want to work on it with others, feel free, or you can do it on your own. But I'll give you a few minutes and then we'll talk about that and I'll collect it. Okay, a couple more minutes and we'll talk about it together. And then I'll collect it and we'll talk a little about museum and building. All right, it looks like a lot of you are ready. If you're still writing, that's okay. But let's talk about some of the causes or contributors. Again, I have a bunch written down. Give me one thing that could have contributed. Maybe it's not the whole picture, but it didn't help. Yeah. The environment's huge, right? For her, that change of environment really like pushed her down this path. Yeah.
If she did drugs, she could be part of the brand new world and deep in friendships.
Yeah. Right, like I think that played a big part of it as well, right? That like, again, it's kind of the environment, but it's like it gave her access to something else, right? And made her part of that group. Yeah. Yeah, that didn't help at all either, right? Like easy access to it. It was a primary relationship for her. All of those things are huge factors. What else? I got several more. Anyone have something else that you identified? Something else that might contribute? Yeah.
Some sort of like emotional traumas. I noticed that we talked about how a lot of people, although they didn't share like the same exact drug use, they all were dealing with like some childhood traumas and sort of stress and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good pickup, right? It said something like we were all broken in some way, right? Like some kind of trauma that left a hole that I think they were all trying to fill, in this case with maybe substance, yeah.
I was gonna say, I know we mentioned how, the change of scenery in New York is really great part, but like,
Yeah.
maybe she, what I put down was like, her life in Pennsylvania also played a role because she lived too comfortably, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, so maybe it
Everybody-
was such a shock, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry, did I cut you off? Go ahead.
I know, I was gonna say, just people, knew her, she like, it's not the life I wanna live, maybe, that's the
Mm.
mentality she was going into this.
Okay,
This shift, so.
yeah, huge shift, right? And I think a very like drastic difference to an environment, right? And that might have contributed in its own way. Anything else? Anyone have something biological? Got a couple of biological ones that I wrote down. Anything from that perspective? If I go back here. Right, anything here that you wrote down? There's one like kind of a big one, or biological, or we could say conditioning. How about either of those? Anyone have anything else? You move, I gotta say, yeah.
Well, I guess, she wanted to do it.
Yeah, she talks about that rush that she gets when she uses it, right? You could take that biologically and say that that's that rush of dopamine, that reward. Or you could talk about that as being reinforcing from an operant conditioning perspective, that was very rewarding for her. Trying to fit in, it could be genetic, right? It could be a neurotransmitter deficiency. It could be a whole host of things. I think she kind of gets that perfect storm. And as you were mentioning, I think this is kind of a very like, this is like the perfect example, right? In a bad way, obviously, like hate to say it's perfect, but it's a really good example of how everything can combine together in a bad way to create that perfect storm. And it's not usually this obvious. So of course, It can be. How about treatments? She has a lot of them in there, right? But what are some things we could do to help her or that she did do to try and get help? What did you put for that one? Here's some things for number 3. Yeah. Right. Gotta get her off of it, right? Detoxing is a big one. What else? What else could we do or did they do? Therapy, right? What are the underlying issues? Maybe there was some stuff like from earlier that could help with it. Underlying contributing factors. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, she took some, right? And we can continue exploring like suppressants and stabilizers that trying to address that. Yeah.
Said support groups or IOP, hospitalization.
Yeah, right. All of those things, right? Any kind of support group, hospitalization, residential treatment center, AA. I think journaling, like if you look at some of the like triggers for her, it'd be pretty obvious identifying them if she started to do any kind of journaling. Again, like multifaceted treatment, because it's a multifaceted like cause, right? So kind of building off of each other with that. Thank you. Thank you for all of you chiming in and sharing your reactions. If you want to make sure your first and last name is on, I'll collect those from you. And then I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about Wednesday before we are done for the day. So while you're passing those up, I'll bring this up here. Thank you. Oh, great, thank you so much. But you saved me having to talk. I didn't have the extra time. Thank you. All right. Okay. Do I have everyone's? Anybody else? So this is our second exam. So you've done one before. It's the same style, same format, same everything as last time, but I just want to touch on it all and see if you have any questions. So Wednesday, we won't have class, right? And my goal with that is that you use this time to take the exam. You have this hour and 15 minutes. But again, if you would rather sleep in, have a nice breakfast, take it later in the day, that's totally fine with me. It will open at 12:01 a.m. and close at 11:59 p.m. So you have the entire day, but I'm giving you this time if you want to take it right now because you know you're busy. So it's on Canvas. So just make sure that you have 75 minutes. Make sure you have good internet. Make sure you have a quiet place to take the test where you're not going to be interrupted. You can use your notes. You can use your book, right? And so really, again, there's no reason you shouldn't do fantastically on this. The study guide, if you click on modules, there is a study guide for you. You go right here, study guide number 2, and it's going to tell you every term, every concept that you need to know. If it's on the study guide, it will be on the test. If it's not on the study guide, you don't need to know it. So just make sure that you know everything on here. And again, if it were me, and this is totally up to you, I would type or write all of this out and I would have it in front of me, right? That way you're not trying to find something in the textbook, trying to find it in like the lectures or the PowerPoint slides. You have it all right there and you studied, you prepared with it. If you're trying to look everything up, I promise you'll be really tight, if not run out of time. And that is a little bit intentional. I didn't make the exam any harder than if you were taking it in person. So as long as you study and prepare, I think you'll do fantastic, right? So you're looking at chapters 8, 6, 7, 9, and 10, everything since the last unit. So nothing from the first unit. None of the exams are cumulative. You're welcome. I think cumulative tests are the devil, right? I never give them. I hate them. Like, I think they're awful. I hated them as a student, so I don't give them as a professor. But make sure you study, make sure that you take it before 11:59 p.m. If something happens on Wednesday, you have an emergency, if something comes up, just make sure you reach out to me before the deadline. I'm happy to work with you, but if you reach out to me after, it will be too late. So that's just kind of my one like hard rule on that. If you run into a problem, please email me, let me know, and we'll work on it together. Okay, just before the deadline, and you'll be fine. Are there any questions? It's the same format, so it's like multiple choice, true, false, very similar format. There's some short answer at the end, but they're never essays. They're going to be things, I think you can kind of identify them. Like if you look at them, they're typically at the end of each one, but it's going to be things where you're like listing stuff rather than any kind of essay. You'll never write an essay for me. My partner teaches English. That's her thing, not mine. Questions, concerns? Did I answer your question? You're like almost at it. Anything for now? You get an extra like 13 minutes to have a snack or I hate to say coffee, but we just talk about substance. Have some coffee. I'll hang out for a minute if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you on Monday next week. We'll do chapter 12, which is schizophrenia. That's our next topic. Okay? Have a wonderful week. Good luck on the test.
Bye.
Yes.
I think it's my computer that's.
Okay, so email it to me.
Right.
But I would much rather turn it
Yeah.
in.
No, I understand.
Yeah, just email it to me.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Have a good one.
Thank you, you too. All right. Oops. Thank you, you as well. Okay.